Hi, my name is Marion Grant, and I want to welcome you to my studio, which is at the Clock Tower Business Center in Pittsfield, Massachusetts. It's a super space, and I've been here since last June. So I am going to talk to you today about a few things. I'm going to talk to you about a little bit about myself and my background and my training. I'm going to show you a few of the recent works that I've been doing. And then I'm also going to show you some of my materials, some of the methods I use, and I'll actually work on a piece that I started yesterday. So my background is this. I'm from Schenectady, New York, and I'm one of those people who will say that since I was a child, all I wanted to do was make things, draw, paint, use color. I mean, that was my life. And when I left Catholic school, which I went to till 8th grade, I attended a public school that had a program in fine arts. So I majored in fine arts in high school, where I can tell you without any doubt, I learned 90% of what I use today. I studied under an educator named Gilda Simiel. She taught in New York City and then in Schenectady. And we had a full studio, and that's where I got my background in everything from stretching canvases to Renaissance technique painting in oils to jewelry making, ceramics, etc. I moved to the Berkshires, and I studied for 2 years at Berkshire Community College under Bob Boland and Julio Granda. And they were two really influential figures for me, particularly Julio when it came to painting and design. And so I think very fondly of him and what he's provided me. If you were to ask me what kind of artist I am today, I think the easiest answer would be that I'm an abstract painter. But if you had spoken to me, 10 years ago, I would say that I am a realistic oil painter. So the way that happened is that while I majored in fine arts at BCC, I completed my bachelor's in arts administration because I really didn't know how I was going to make a living doing art. And after that, I got my master's in art history. So those are the degrees that have kind of formed my life's work and my vision of how to pursue art. So I've curated, I've taught, I've educated adults, children in art history, studio arts, fine arts, done museum exhibitions. But about 20 years ago, I decided I wanted to paint again, and I was astounded to find that my oil paint set still had good paint in it. So I began painting, and I went back to the basics. I'm going to show you a quick piece that I did from that time, because I think people think that abstract painters do that because they don't know how to paint realistically. So when I started painting again 20 years ago, I was using traditional oil painting techniques, particularly Renaissance techniques, which were layers and layers of thin oil glazes, and I did very, very traditional topics. And I can say after about 8 years, I definitely had enough of it. And so I began to move away, and I started doing work that was more based on what I would describe as the basic language of art, to really explore interrelationships of color, once again to really look at things like geometric forms and how they relate to one another, and also to use techniques that I'd been developing first in oil and then when I started adding acrylics, where I was creating a lot of textures and embellishments through combining paints in unusual ways. So that leads me to where I am today. So I'm retired from the work world, so I really do devote a lot of my time now to my painting and artwork in the studio. And at present, I'm doing acrylic painting with mixed media on canvas. And that is working out pretty well for me right now. The work you're going to see today is all work that's been done really in the last 6 months. So I think it might be nice if I could show you some of my work. Great. I'd like to be able to show you some of my more recent work now that I was describing. I've been working on canvases, 12 by 12s, 20 by 24s, and then 24 by 24. I'll be attacking some larger canvases this spring. So this is the work I'm doing right now. It's called Abstract Mixed Media. And it is a combination of paints, papers. I'll talk about the sources of my papers in a while. Things like paint sticks, crayons. Sometimes I use fabric and thread. Sometimes I use small objects. And I also use a lot of materials that create textures. So a lot of these pieces that I'm in front of are heavily layered. There's a lot of acrylic medium that's used to layer down paper and other items to create the textures. So I'm going to start on this furthest piece here, and it's called The Meeting of Dante and Beatrice, and the titles tend to be entirely unrelated to what you're seeing. People love titles on pictures. It intrigues them, so I've started putting them on. You'll see in this picture that there's a definite palette and a definite layout. So I am exploring in this one these kinds of, they're almost like shaped like racetracks, these kinds of little bent shapes. And there's almost always circles in the work I've been doing lately. And so, there's a combination all throughout of layers of paint and paper, and then you can see some of the paint papers. This is a hand-painted paper of mine. Different textural items underneath paint. I happen to know this is a tire. I mean, this is just this image that really somehow struck me as interesting, just kind of moved in. There's some images in the corner there in that half circle or quarter circle that are from an old book of illustrations. And a lot of the paint is then drawn on. I've stamped on it. I've used acrylic pens. And so that creates a little more visual interest. I like to think that the painting works as a whole, but that when you get closer to it, that each section is interesting on its own right. Moving along, this is another one with this kind of long curved shape. Another motif that is visible in a lot of my pictures that I've done in the last few months have been eggs. People have asked me why avocados are there, but they're definitely eggs. So, are they symbolic? I think they're somewhat symbolic of, women and the idea of birth and rebirth, fertility, but I would leave it at that because these are not pictures that are really meant to send that kind of message. They're not political. In fact, I've sort of moved away from more political and representational art because I didn't feel I was maybe conveying the information the way I wanted to. So I came back to something that works for me. So in here, lots of paint, a lot of paper, a lot of use of this Posca marker, these acrylic markers, the occasional what's that doing in there kind of image, something out of a magazine maybe. I love maps. I often include maps. And so you can start to see this buildup of shapes. Some of these go through a lot of changes. Some come out, pretty much how I started them. This one stuck to the plan. The one over here, not so much. I really did a lot of work on this. So this is a kind of a more tidy, traditional, geometric type of picture. I lay everything out on the canvas first, where I want certain shapes, where I want intersections. I draw everything freehand. I don't use rulers or stencils to create these forms because I don't want them to look too perfect. So in here, this is a technique I use where I basically, this is not real writing. This is a kind of fake writing on translucent paper. And then it's used in some of my pictures as a kind of written motif, but good luck reading it. There is, however, a small piece up here, though, from my father's address book from 1949. And so these pages also appear in this picture. And they are in his handwriting. And so when I found it, it seemed like a good thing to do with the book. A lot of painted paper in here, a piece of birch bark. So there's paint put down, there's paper put down, there's more paint put on top of that paper, there's drawing. And then sometimes I feel like I need something somewhat recognizable. Here's a little section of bricks. But the rest, for the most part, these are all hand-painted papers that you're seeing here. And this looked entirely different in the beginning. I went back in and I drew circles in here because, I don't know, needed something to fill this circle here. So I hope when a viewer looks at these that they can find some pleasure in moving around the canvas. It's not so much that each picture has a focal point, it has a lot of focal points, and I want people to move through them and make their own judgments, but hopefully find pleasure in the colors that are used, in the juxtaposition of shapes, and in the use of mark making and lines. So I think we'll move to my work table and then some of the stuff I'm doing. This is my work table. It is a very large, actually butcher's block that came out of an old market in Pittsfield. And I've worked on it for years. I love to work flat because I can continuously turn my paintings or collages and see them from multiple angles. So I'm just going to start with looking at a few of my tools. I use the most basic tools. My brushes are in terrible shape. I don't buy expensive brushes anymore because of the way I paint. I'm using a lot of acrylic. I'm really loading brushes. Some of my brushes that get really beat up are some of my favorites because of the marks they make when they lay paint down on the canvas. Obviously, I'm using paper, so I'm either cutting with scissors or tearing. Tearing is my preferred method, but it just doesn't always work. And palette knives to mix paints and lay paint onto a picture if I'm trying to build up a certain kind of texture. As far as my materials go, I think I'll just reach over here and show you. I use acrylic paints. I don't exclusively use golden, but it's a very high quality paint, great mixing capabilities, beautiful colors. I feel like when I transitioned from oil to acrylic, using these was very helpful to me. When I'm working on a new piece, I'll talk about it in a minute, I do write down my color formulas so I can make the colors more than once. The other materials I use are mediums. So these can be mixed with paint to create thinner or thicker paints. They can also be used as adhesives. So I like to use matte gel for my adhesive for most papers. Not all of them. Some papers are more absorbent and you don't have to. But I have, some paper I'm going to be adhering to this picture. I'll be using this matte gel. And papers. So I love paper. For about 6 to 7 years, all I did was work on paper. So getting back to working on canvas is kind of a big change for me. I have to keep my papers organized. Sometimes I'll spend a week making and painting papers. I use a gel print to do kind of mono printing for some of my papers. So I'll show an example of that. This is mono printed paper, and so is this. There's tons of great jelly printing tutorials online. It's a really great method, and you can use your acrylic paints. I also paint on paper a lot. So, here's a few examples. Well, not that one, right? Where I'm doing some images on paper, all different kinds, and then mixing them with more commercial papers, like a piece of origami paper. I set up a palette for this in which there's I think there's 5 colors maybe. So I have a green section. That's what this is for. There's some elements of a kind of pinkish. There is off-white. And so I got a lot of those because I'm not sure really what I want to use. I love commercially handmade papers like this, like bark papers, using things like mulberry papers, good quality mulberry papers. But I also draw on paper and create my own, designs on it. And as I mentioned, I paint on paper. So there's a few painted papers here. This is painted below it. This is just like very cool wallpaper I got from some secondhand store. And this is hand painted. So these are probably going to appear in here. And I also have made handmade paper. It's very chunky, so I use it sparingly, but it gives great texture to these pieces. Often I will cut a piece, fill a section in, and then I'll work on top of it. And so it's just has a really, really great texture. And I also should say, I'm not quite sure if I have it here, but another item I use for creating texture is to use things like molding pastes. So molding paste, you can lay it in either with color or without color. You can create designs using things like tools. This is like a little comb tool, so you could create a design in your thick paste. Or you could use stamps to create some sort of textural elements. And these are just a few of the 8 million ideas you could do. So I'm going to tell you quickly how I got this thing started. There's literally pieces of paper attached to it. So one of the methods I use when I'm working is typically I will lay out my concept using, maybe some kind of a neutral brown paint, and then I will go in and I'll lightly paint sections. So, I'm trying to do a more subdued palette than I normally do on this. It looks a little like sherbet ice cream right now, so I'm definitely going to neutralize some of these colors. Once I reach this phase, a quick sketch is done. I'm not really sure where it's going to go yet. I've been looking at my papers, and I start saying, well, maybe this paper would go well in here. And I'll often tape paper on and look at it while I'm thinking about it. And truthfully, I usually work on 2 of these at a time, at least 2. So here again, same thing. I also want to add papers that have texture. So here's a piece of mulberry that's got this incredible sticks in it, and I love it. This piece, obviously, I created a template for it. It's cut. So I have made a template, laid it down, and cut this piece of hand-painted paper to put there. So we'll probably adhere a couple of these things like this today. Same here. I thought I want to add some sections to this kind of deep blue-purple. It's the darkest color that will be used in here, and it's probably going to go here as well. These are notes. This is how I do a note, okay, this is going to be a dark section. That's why it's got a little squiggly line. And some things don't get resolved for a while. So I think what I'll do is I'll pull out adhesive. I'll show you how I apply some of these, and we can kind of, take a minute at that point and assess whether it's working and what kind of changes might be made. I think at this point maybe we'll just add some pieces of handmade papers and hand-painted papers to this very early picture. This picture will take me 2 to 3 weeks to complete. I might be working on other things at the same time, but it is definitely a process of adding and adding, sometimes subtracting, until it begins to feel right, until it's got like a rich texture. And I don't feel I have to rush the work, which is good. So I'm using my matte adhesive, and I'm going in here, and I'm going to lay down this hand-painted, hand-printed paper on here. And there will be quite a few more layers as well of paint on this. And so you should sort of think of it as it is, which is just in progress. And I think I'm going to include something here. There's a lot of beautiful commercially made papers, which I avail myself to. I love Japanese papers. I love all the patterns that they come in. I am always looking at wallpapers, magazines. I will often go in and draw over magazine pictures or paint over them to make a paper that's not literal. I'm not looking for a literal image, but I'm looking for the right colors and textures. So I have a little piece of tape here. There we go. And these will often get multiple coats of acrylic medium over the course of the making, and that's how they stay on. These things are really, as much paper that you see adhered to many of them, they really stay stuck down. They'll get quite a bit of assistance through the mediums that go over the top of them. So I like to generally put the medium on the picture itself. And then sometimes I feel I need to clean it away from the edges, which I'll do if I need to. But you do need, you really want it to stick down, and you really want it to become part of the surface. And sometimes I'll put a little medium under the edges, and sometimes I'll put it over the top. Forgot to introduce my best tool of all, which is a rag. So, okay, we're going to take a very quick look. Okay, so these are some pieces I had pre-planned to put down. I have a couple more, and then I'm going to get a little more spontaneous if we have enough time. I won't demonstrate putting the paint down again because that's just another whole process. So here's the piece of paper that was hand painted and cut from a little stencil, and so I am going to actually get a bunch on the paper as well. I just want to make sure this really sticks down. It's a beautiful paper, Strathmore. I found a book of Strathmore papers, basically advertising their product line. And so it was a great opportunity to play with some of those. So this is good. So this is going to be a little trickier to get down because the paper is curling. It has quite a bit of paint on it. And when I really run into trouble with pieces, large pieces or very curly pieces, I'll just stick like paint containers on them to weigh them down because I want them down, I want them stuck, I don't want to work with any edges. So there's a ton of adhesive under here, and I'm going to try to smooth it down. All right, so I think this is going to be wrapping it up for today as we get this last piece down. I'll give you a quick look at it. And I just want to say thank you so much for coming into my studio today at the Clock Tower Artists. Again, my name is Marion Grant. You can see more of my work at my website at www.mariongrantart.com. And I hope you'll check it out. Thanks again.